The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Cedar Ridge's dusty main street, turning the weathered buildings into furnaces. Jake Thompson adjusted his worn leather hat as he guided his horse toward Miller's General Store. At 35, he carried the weight of too many losses in his blue-gray eyes, a scar from Normandy on his chin, and 3 years of emptiness since the car accident that claimed his wife Sarah and 6-year-old son Tommy. "Jake Thompson!" Frank Morrison's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a whip crack. Morrison emerged from the bank's shadows, his expensive grey suit immaculate despite the dust. At 50, he commanded respect through fear, his cold blue eyes marking him as a man who collected debts in more than money. "Morrison," Jake's voice carried bone-deep weariness. "I've been thinking about our conversation last month, about your ranch." Morrison's tone was casual, but his eyes remained predatory. "Market's tough, drought's making it worse. Maybe it's time to consider my offer before circumstances force less favorable terms." Morrison had been circling Jake's property for months, making aggressive offers at a fraction of its worth. The land held some of the county's best water rights. "Ranch isn't for sale," Jake replied steadily. "Everything's for sale, Thompson. Your taxes are overdue. Bank's nervous about that loan." Morrison's smile sharpened. "Be a shame if you lost everything over a few $100s. Before Jake could respond, commotion erupted from the town square, angry voices, running feet, and above it all, a woman's voice raised in defiant protest. "Let go of me! I haven't done anything wrong." Jake turned toward the sound, his hand moving instinctively toward his Colt, .45. Near the fountain, a crowd of men had surrounded a young Mexican-American woman like wolves circling prey. Esperanza Flores stood like a desert flower, refusing to bend, her 19 years having taught her that dignity was sometimes all a person had left. Her long black hair was braided back, unable to hide the proud set of her shoulders or the fire in her dark eyes. Her brown cotton dress spoke of working-class practicality, but she wore it with royal bearing. "Troublemaker," Morrison muttered. "Been stirring up the Mexican workers, filling their heads with ideas about fair wages and workers' rights. Bad for business." The crowd was growing uglier. Jake recognized Charlie Watson from the feed store, Big Jim Hawkins from the lumber mill, and 3 of Morrison's hired hands. Their voices rose with each passing moment. "Go back where you came from," Watson shouted, alcohol slurring his words. "We don't need your kind stirring up trouble," Hawkins added, stepping closer menacingly. But Morrison's man, Pete Dalton, a scarred brute with a reputation for violence, made Jake's blood run cold. Dalton was reaching for Esperanza's arm, his intentions clear in his leer. "Girl needs to learn her place," Dalton growled, thick fingers closing around her wrist. "Don't touch me." Esperanza yanked away, but his grip was iron-strong. Something snapped inside Jake Thompson. Maybe it was Sarah's voice, always defending the innocent. Maybe his father's lessons about protecting others. Or maybe the recognition that some lines, once crossed, changed a man forever. He started walking toward the crowd, boots striking wooden planks with purpose. Morrison called after him, but Jake didn't turn around. "Let her go!" Jake's voice cut through the crowd's murmur like a blade. The men turned, surprise flickering across their faces. Dalton still held Esperanza's wrist, though his grip loosened at the interruption. "This ain't your business, Thompson," Watson snarled. "Go back to your ranch and leave decent folk alone." "Looks like my business to me," Jake replied, scanning the crowd with tactical awareness. 6 grown men surrounding one young woman. "Where I come from, we call that cowardice." Dangerous silence fell over the scene. Esperanza looked at Jake with surprise and wariness, wondering if he represented threat or ally. "The girl's been causing trouble." Hawkins stepped forward, using his massive frame to intimidate. "Filling Mexicans' heads with communist ideas. Someone needs to set her straight." "What I see," Jake said quietly, "is a young woman exercising her right to speak her mind. Last I checked, that wasn't a crime in America. Dalton's face twisted with ugly humor. Since when do you care about Mexicans, Thompson? Heard grief's made you soft since your family died. The mention of his family hit like a physical blow, but Jake kept his expression steady. Maybe, or maybe I just remember what this country stands for. Dr. Samuel Hayes emerged from his clinic, drawn by the commotion. The elderly physician adjusted his glasses, taking in the scene with sharp intelligence. "Gentlemen," Dr. Hayes called, "surely there's a better way to resolve this. We're supposed to be civilized people." "Stay out of this, Doc," Dalton warned, though his voice lacked conviction when addressing the town's respected physician. Jake stepped closer, now within arm's reach. "I'm asking you one more time politely. Let the lady go. And if I don't," Dalton's hand moved toward his gun, "then we'll find out just how soft grief has made me." They stared at each other for a long moment, tension thick enough to cut. Around them the crowd held its breath. Esperanza broke the standoff with a quick twist, breaking free and stepping toward Jake, her dark eyes blazing with gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, her accented English carrying musical cadence and steel conviction. Jake nodded without taking his eyes off Dalton. "Ma'am." "This isn't over, Thompson," Dalton growled. "No," Jake agreed quietly. "I don't reckon it is." Morrison appeared at the crowd's edge, his face dark with calculation. "Interesting development, Thompson. Didn't know you had such progressive views on local labor." "I have views on right and wrong," Jake replied. "Those seem harder to find these days." Morrison's smile promised future consequences. "Indeed they are." As the crowd dispersed, Jake found himself alone with Esperanza and Dr. Hayes. The young woman straightened her dress with remarkable composure. "Miss Flores," Dr. Hayes said gently, "are you injured?" "No, doctor, thank you." Her English was careful but clear. She turned to Jake, studying his face with obvious intelligence. "And thank you, Signor Thompson. You did not have to help me." "Anyone would have done the same," Jake replied, though he knew it wasn't true. "But not everyone did," Esperanza observed. "That makes it mean something more." Uncomfortable silence fell between them. Jake found himself looking into her eyes and seeing something he'd forgotten existed. Hope, determination, unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better. It reminded him painfully of Sarah. "You should be careful," Jake said. "Morrison and his men don't forget. They might make trouble for you and your family." Esperanza's chin lifted with inherited pride. "We are not afraid of trouble, Mr. Thompson. My people have faced trouble for a long time. We know how to survive." "Surviving isn't the same as living," Jake replied from some deep place he'd thought sealed forever. "No," she agreed, a small smile touching her lips. "But sometimes, surviving is how you earn the right to live." Dr. Hayes cleared his throat diplomatically. "Miss Flores, perhaps I should escort you home. The streets might not be safe for a while." "That is kind, Doctor, but I can take care of myself." Esperanza looked at Jake one more time, as if memorizing his face. "Vaya con Dios, Mr. Thompson. Go with God." Jake watched her walk away, head held high despite everything. There was something about her, strength that reminded him of desert flowers blooming in harsh conditions. As she disappeared around the corner, he realized he'd been holding his breath. "Remarkable young woman," Dr. Hayes observed. "Her father is Tomas Flores, hardest working man I've ever met. The family came here 5 years ago, fleeing trouble in Mexico. They've been nothing but assets to this community." "Then why do Morrison and his people want them gone?" Dr. Hayes cleaned his glasses carefully. "Because Esperanza has been organizing the Mexican workers, teaching them about their rights, helping them understand they don't have to accept starvation wages and dangerous conditions. That knowledge is dangerous to men like Morrison." Jake nodded, pieces falling into place. "Morrison made me another offer today, not the first time. He's buying up properties around the valley, always through intermediaries, always at prices that force people to sell. Word is he's working for some corporation back east. They want to own everything from here to the territorial border. And people like the Flores family are in the way. People like all of us are in the way, Dr. Hayes corrected. But Mexican families are easier targets, less legal protection, fewer connections, more vulnerable. Jake felt something stirring, an emotion he'd thought died with his family. Purpose. Doc, what do you know about this labor organizing? Dr. Hayes studied Jake's face. Are you thinking of getting involved? I'm thinking about what my wife would have done, what she would have expected me to do. The doctor smiled. Sarah always had a strong sense of justice. I delivered your boy. She made me promise to raise him to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Tommy's mention sent familiar pain through Jake's heart, but also brought warm memory of Sarah's fierce protectiveness and unwavering moral compass. Where do the Flores family live? 2 miles south in the old Peterson place. But Jake, Dr. Hayes gripped his arm. Be careful. Morrison has money, connections, and men who use violence. If you cross him, there's no going back. Jake looked where Esperanza had disappeared, then back at the doctor. Maybe it's time I stopped going backward. As he mounted his horse and rode from town, Jake Thompson felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. The sense that tomorrow might bring something worth fighting for. Behind him, Morrison watched from the bank's shadows, calculating new strategies for unexpected obstacles. The sun descended toward western mountains, painting the sky gold and crimson. For the first time since the accident, the beauty didn't feel like mockery of his loss. Instead, it felt like a promise that some things endured beyond tragedy, that hope could grow in unlikely places, and that the most important battles were fought by ordinary people who chose to stand when it mattered most. Dawn came slowly to the Thompson ranch, painting the desert in soft pastels. Jake had been awake since before first light, sleep troubled by dreams mixing Sarah's memory with images of dark eyes and defiant courage. His coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but couldn't wash away the feeling that yesterday had changed something fundamental. He was mending fence when he saw the dust cloud, too much for a single rider, moving too fast for casual travel. Someone was coming with purpose. 15 minutes later, Frank Morrison rode into the yard, leading 6 men. They spread in a tactical semicircle, positioning for crossfire. Morrison remained mounted, his expensive suit somehow immaculate, despite the desert ride. "Thompson!" Morrison called with accustomed authority. "We need to talk." Jake emerged from the barn, movements unhurried despite crackling tension. He'd deliberately left his gun belt inside, sometimes showing you weren't afraid mattered more than being ready to fight. "Morrison, you're on my land without invitation. Business brings me here, the kind that can't wait for social niceties." Morrison's smile revealed predatory teeth. "Seems you've developed concerning new associations since yesterday." "Can't say I know what you mean." "Sure you do. Young Mexican girl, labor organizing, interfering with the natural order." Morrison leaned forward, voice dropping conversationally. "My employers don't care for interference. Bad for business, bad for community stability." Jake's hand found the fence post hammer. Not much against 6 guns, but better than nothing. "Last I checked, this was still America. People have rights." "Rights." Morrison chuckled without humor. "Funny thing about rights. They only exist as long as people with power respect them. My employers have different perspectives on which rights matter." A lean gunfighter shifted restlessly, hand drumming against his Colt. Jake didn't recognize him. Imported talent for this conversation. "Here's what's happening," Morrison continued with ultimatum cadence. "Stay away from the Flores family. Stop interfering with local business. Seriously reconsider my generous ranch offer before circumstances force less favorable terms. And if I don't..." Morrison's mask dropped. Then you'll discover accidents happen to anyone. Barn fires, cattle rustling, broken fences. Sometimes a man just disappears riding alone. Deserts dangerous for someone without friends. The threat hung between them like funeral smoke. Jake felt familiar calm settling, the clarity that had carried him through Normandy when violence became inevitable. "You know what I learned in the war, Morrison?" Jake's voice was conversational. "The biggest difference between a soldier and a bully is that soldiers fight people who can fight back." The gunfighter's hand tightened, but Morrison raised his hand to stop him. "Careful, Thompson. You're outnumbered 6-1. Maybe, Jake acknowledged, eyes assessing the mounted men with veteran awareness. "But I'm betting your boys aren't as eager to die for mysterious employers as they are to collect pay. Hired guns like fights they can win. Start a shooting war with a cornered man on his own land. That's where even winners end up dead." Uncomfortable silence settled over the yard. Morrison's men were professionals, not suicidal. Fighting a cornered man at home was widow-making work. "This isn't over," Morrison said, wheeling his horse angrily. 24 hours to reconsider. After that, he let the threat hang unfinished. Jake watched them ride away, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline rather than fear. For the first time in 3 years, he felt alive. Another dust cloud appeared, smaller, leisurely. Dr. Hayes arrived in his medical buggy, face creased with concern. "Jake, thought I might find you here, assuming Morrison hadn't already visited." "Still breathing, Doc." "For now." Dr. Hayes climbed down carefully. "Heard Morrison and his boys rode out this way armed for trouble. Wanted to ensure you didn't need medical attention." They settled in Jake's kitchen, where Dr. Hayes accepted coffee and prepared to tell a long story. 5 years ago, Mexican families started arriving permanently, not just seasonal workers, but families seeking to settle. Most fled political persecution or economic collapse. Local ranchers were initially happy, reliable workers accepting lower wages. Jake nodded, encouraging him to continue. Then Esperanza started asking dangerous questions. Why Mexican workers earned half what whites received for identical work. Why they lived in shacks without running water while employers lived comfortably. Why their children couldn't attend the same schools. So they decided to make an example. They tried economic pressure first, threatening to fire anyone associating with the Flores family. When that failed, escalation to intimidation. Yesterday was just the latest attempt. Jake stared out at Sarah's herb garden. What does Morrison really want? Morrison represents Eastern Consortium, cattle barons, mining interests, agricultural corporations. They're buying land across the territory, consolidating smaller holdings into massive industrial operations. And Mexican families are obstacles. All of us are obstacles, Jake, but Mexican families are easier targets. Fewer legal protections, less political influence, more vulnerability. Dr. Hayes leaned forward urgently. But if men like Morrison break their resistance, they can do the same to anyone. That's why he wants my ranch, water rights. Your ranch controls the county's best water access. With changing climate patterns, water's becoming more valuable than cattle or crops. Dr. Hayes studied Jake carefully. The question is, what will you do? Before Jake could answer, hoofbeats approached. Esperanza Flores rode toward his ranch on a paint horse, posture proud and determined despite circumstances. "Looks like the mountain's coming to Mohammed," Dr. Hayes observed. Jake opened the door as Esperanza dismounted. Up close he could see resolve in her dark eyes, but also worry she carried well. "Mr. Thompson, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Miss Flores." "Dr. Hayes and I were having coffee. Would you join us?" "Thank you, but I cannot stay. I came to warn you." Ice formed in Jake's stomach. "What kind of warning?" "Frank Morrison visited my family this morning. He made threats about what happens to anyone associating with troublemakers like me." Her voice remained steady, despite burning anger. "I couldn't let you face danger because of kindness to me." What kind of threats? Dr. Hayes asked, focusing on specifics. Accidents could happen to anyone. People interfering with business might find property damaged, livestock poisoned, homes burned. The desert is dangerous for people riding alone. Jake felt cold rage settling. The emotion that had carried him through European villages, now mixed with fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. Miss Flores, I appreciate the warning, but you shouldn't have come alone. If Morrison's men saw you, they did. 3 followed me part way before turning back. Her smile was small but genuine. I think they wanted to ensure I delivered Morrison's message properly. Dr. Hayes stood abruptly, pale with concern. Esperanza, this is exactly the escalation I feared. Morrison's isolating you, cutting off potential allies. Perhaps, but I won't be intimidated into silence. My people deserve better than poverty wages and dangerous conditions. They deserve dignity that comes from fair treatment. She looked directly at Jake. The question is, what do we do about it? The word "we" hung between them, carrying implications beyond yesterday's confrontation. Jake found himself at a crossroads that would define not just his immediate future, but what kind of man he would be. He thought about Sarah, about values she'd tried to instill in Tommy, about the country he'd fought to defend. He thought about empty years since the accident, the slow death of hope and purpose. We fight, he said simply. Esperanza's smile was like sunrise over desert. Then we need a plan. Dr. Hayes shook his head ruefully. I have a feeling I'm about to become accessory to something that could get us all killed. Probably, Jake agreed. But some things are worth dying for. And I've been dead for 3 years anyway. Maybe it's time to start living again. Outside, the Arizona sun climbed toward merciless zenith, but inside Jake Thompson's kitchen, something new was being born. An alliance that would challenge established order and prove that unlikely friendships could change history's course. As they began planning resistance, none could imagine how their small defiance would ripple outward, touching lives across the territory. All they knew was they'd found something worth fighting for, and that was enough to begin. 3 weeks had passed since that morning in Jake's kitchen, when 3 unlikely allies declared war on injustice. The battle lines were clearly drawn, with Morrison escalating intimidation, while Jake, Esperanza, and Dr. Hayes organized resistance among Mexican families and sympathetic Anglo residents. Jake's ranch had become unofficial headquarters, the large barn serving as a meeting place where workers could gather without fear. Dr. Hayes used medical rounds as cover for carrying messages, while Esperanza's natural leadership inspired dozens to stand up despite risks. But Morrison wasn't playing by any rules except his own. The first barn fire happened Tuesday night at the Rodriguez homestead. Tomas Rodriguez had been among the first supporting Esperanza's efforts, and his barn, along with winter feed, went up in flames visible for miles. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Resistance would meet economic destruction. The second incident was more personal. Elena Flores, Esperanza's 16-year-old sister, was followed from school by 2 of Morrison's men, making crude suggestions about what happened to young Mexican girls wandering alone. Elena was unharmed, but the psychological impact on the family was devastating. Jake had wanted to ride into town with his Winchester and settle accounts the old way. But Esperanza convinced him violence would only give Morrison excuse to involve territorial authorities. They needed to be smarter. That's when Dr. Hayes suggested contacting the territorial governor. Samuel Crawford is an honest man, the doctor explained during late-night strategy sessions. We served together in the Mexican War. If we can document Morrison's crimes, threats, property destruction, intimidation, Crawford might send investigators. And if he isn't? Esperanza asked. Then we'll know we're truly alone, Jake replied grimly. They spent 2 weeks documenting every incident, gathering sworn statements, building a legal case. Dr. Hayes wrote detailed letters to Governor Crawford, outlining the situation and requesting intervention. The response came faster than expected, delivered by a territorial marshal who arrived on dusty Thursday afternoon with news that changed everything. Marshal William Bill Cody, no relation to the showman, was a weathered man in his 50s who'd spent adult life bringing law to lawless places. He listened carefully to their evidence, asked pointed questions, examined the Rodriguez barn ruins with professional thoroughness. "Governor Crawford takes these allegations seriously," Marshal Cody told them in Jake's kitchen. "He's authorized full investigation. If I find criminal activity evidence, I can make arrests regardless of who's involved." Morrison's reaction was swift and vicious. 3 days after Marshal Cody's arrival, Esperanza disappeared. Jake learned about it when Tomas Flores arrived before dawn, face twisted with anguish and rage. The older man's careful English deserted him in panic, leaving rapid Spanish punctuated by English words like "gone" and "taken" and "help us, please." Dr. Hayes arrived shortly after, roused by Maria Flores's frantic pounding. Between them, they pieced together what happened. Esperanza had left home the previous evening to visit a sick child in worker camps, something she did regularly, carrying Dr. Hayes's medicine and offering comfort. She never returned. "We found her horse wandering near Coyote Canyon," Tomas explained, voice breaking. "Saddle still on, but she was gone. No struggle signs, no tracks we could follow in darkness." Jake felt familiar cold rage settling, but deeper, more personal this time. Over 3 weeks, he'd come to understand that what he felt for Esperanza went beyond alliance or friendship. She'd awakened something he thought died with Sarah, the capacity to care about someone else's welfare more than his own survival. "We'll find her," Jake promised, checking his Winchester and filling saddlebags with ammunition. "I'm coming," Tomas declared. "And me," Dr. Hayes added, though they knew the elderly physician would be liability in a fight. Marshal Cody appeared in the doorway, badge glinting. "Not without the law. This is exactly the vigilante justice that gives men like Morrison their power." "The law hasn't done much good so far," Jake replied, voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Give it a chance. I have deputies riding from Tucson and Phoenix. We'll search every inch of this territory if necessary." The marshal's voice carried accustomed authority. "But we do this legally, or not at all?" Jake wanted to argue, to saddle up and ride hard, regardless of consequences. But Esperanza's voice echoed in memory, reminding him they needed to be smarter than their enemies. The search began at Coyote Canyon, spreading outward in widening circles. Jake knew the territory better than most, working alongside deputies, reading sign and following trails leading nowhere, frustration growing with each passing hour. By sunset, they'd found nothing except Esperanza's hat caught on mesquite near an old mine shaft. The hat was undamaged, placed deliberately rather than lost in struggle. Another message from Morrison, clear as a signature. That night, Jake sat on his porch staring at stars, wrestling with demons he'd thought buried with his family. Familiar loss weight pressed down, worsened by knowing his involvement had endangered Esperanza. Dr. Hayes found him at midnight, carrying coffee and quiet wisdom earned from 40 years, treating human suffering. "She's not dead," the doctor said without preamble. "How can you be sure?" "Because Morrison's too smart to kill her outright. Dead, she becomes a martyr. Alive, she's leverage." Dr. Hayes sipped thoughtfully. "He'll want to trade her life for our silence. And if he's wrong about us being willing to trade, then we hope we find her before he realizes his mistake." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men bound by shared purpose and growing friendship. Finally, Dr. Hayes spoke again. "You know, Jake, I've delivered hundreds of babies over the years, watched them grow, marry, have children, but I've never seen anyone fight for beliefs the way Esperanza does. She has something rare, courage that changes the world." "Had," Jake corrected bitterly. Past tense. Has, Dr. Hayes insisted. Present tense. And you have it too, or you wouldn't be torturing yourself over her safety instead of riding for the territorial border. Jake looked at the older man, seeing steady confidence that made him Cedar Ridge's most trusted resident. What if we're too late? What if Morrison decides she's more trouble than she's worth? Then we make him pay a price, ensuring no one else makes the same mistake. Dr. Hayes's voice carried unfamiliar steel. But I don't think it'll come to that. Morrison needs her alive to break the resistance. Dead, she becomes more powerful than he can imagine. Dawn brought unexpected visitors. Maria and Elena Flores arrived before sunrise, both carrying food bundles and determination shining brighter than morning stars. We cannot sit home and wait, Maria announced in careful English, maternal authority brooking no argument. Esperanza is our blood, but also your friend. We searched together. Elena, barely 16 but carrying her sister's fierce pride, stepped forward. I know places Esperanza goes that you might not consider, secret places where she meets workers afraid to be seen at regular gatherings. Marshal Cody arrived an hour later with reinforcements, 3 deputy marshals, and Joe Crow Feather, a half-Apache scout whose reputation for finding the unfindable was legendary across the territory. This is no longer just about a missing person, the marshal announced. My investigation uncovered evidence of criminal conspiracy involving property destruction, intimidation, and possible kidnapping. We have warrants for Frank Morrison and 6 associates. Jake felt grim satisfaction, tempered by knowledge that legal warrants wouldn't help Esperanza if Morrison decided to eliminate evidence. Joe Crow Feather proved his reputation well-earned. Within 2 hours, he'd found tracks other searchers missed, unshod horse prints leading from Coyote Canyon toward old silver mines in the Dragoon Mountains. 3 riders, Joe reported, weathered face grim. 2 horses carrying single riders, 1 carrying double. The double-loaded horse has distinctive left rear shoe chip. How old? Marshal Cody asked. Day and a half, maybe 2. Trail leads into rough country. If they're holed up in the old mine complex, could take days searching every shaft and tunnel. We don't have days, Jake said quietly, checking weapons with methodical precision. The ride took most of the morning, following Joe's expert tracking through increasingly rugged terrain. The abandoned silver mines had been empty nearly a decade, their shafts and tunnels creating a maze that could hide an army. As they approached the mining complex, Joe raised his hand for silence. Smoke, he said simply, pointing toward thin grey line rising behind Rocky Ridge. Marshal Cody deployed his men with military precision, surrounding the suspected campsite while Jake and the marshal approached directly. The plan was simple. Demand surrender, offer safe passage for Esperanza's release. Hope Morrison valued his life more than his criminal enterprise. They found the camp in a sheltered canyon between mine shafts. 3 men sat around a small fire, horses hobbled nearby. Frank Morrison looked up as lawman appeared, expensive suit rumpled and dust-stained, but cold smile firmly in place. Marshal, Morrison said pleasantly, as if they'd met at church social rather than criminal hideout. What brings you to this remote location? You do, Morrison. You're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, and property destruction. Marshal Cody's voice carried flat authority of inevitable justice. Kidnapping? Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Marshal. Miss Flores is here of her own free will, aren't you, my dear? Esperanza emerged from one of the mine shafts, and Jake's heart nearly stopped. She was alive, apparently unharmed, but something in her posture suggested appearances were deceiving. Her dark eyes met his across the canyon, and he saw a message that chilled his blood. Mr. Thompson, she said formally, voice carrying careful control. I was not expecting to see you here. Miss Flores, Jake replied, playing along with whatever game was being enacted. Are you injured? Not yet, she said, emphasis on yet making Morrison's smile widen. You see, Marshal, Morrison continued, Miss Flores and I have been having enlightening conversation about the future of labor relations in Cedar Ridge. She's come to understand that resistance is futile when faced with superior resources. Have I? Esperanza's voice carried subtle defiance only someone who knew her would recognize. Morrison's expression hardened slightly. You have indeed. Miss Flores was just about to write a letter to her followers, explaining she's decided to abandon her misguided crusade and encourage all Mexican workers to accept their proper place. Under duress, Marshal Cody observed. Under enlightenment, Morrison corrected. Sometimes people need help seeing truth. Jake studied the scene, military training analyzing angles, positions, possibilities. Morrison's companions were positioned for crossfire, but also exposed to hidden deputies. More importantly, Esperanza stood near a mine shaft that could provide cover if shooting started. Here's my counter-offer, Marshal Cody said calmly. Release Miss Flores immediately, surrender peacefully, and I guarantee you'll live to stand trial. Refuse, and my deputies have orders to shoot anyone threatening a hostage. Morrison's smile never wavered. I'm afraid you're operating under misunderstanding, Marshal. Miss Flores isn't a hostage. She's a collaborator. Show him the letter, my dear. Esperanza reached into her dress, withdrawing folded paper. As she moved, Jake caught a glimpse that made his pulse quicken, a small knife handle hidden in her boot. She hadn't been sitting passively. She'd been planning escape. Would you like me to read it aloud? Esperanza asked, voice carrying odd inflection Jake suddenly understood was warning. That won't be necessary, Morrison replied, but Jake could see uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Esperanza unfolded the paper and began reading. To my fellow workers and friends, I write this letter to inform you that I have been wrong about many things. As she spoke, Jake noticed her positioning herself differently, angling toward the mine shaft while maintaining eye contact with Morrison. Whatever she was planning was about to happen. And I now understand that resistance to authority only brings suffering to those I claim to help. The letter was clearly coerced, probably written under threat, but Esperanza was reading it with subtle emphasis that transformed its meaning. To anyone who knew her, it was obviously false, but more than that, it was a signal. Therefore, I renounce my previous actions and encourage all workers to accept. Esperanza suddenly crumpled the letter and dove toward the mine shaft as chaos erupted. Jake had his Colt out before Morrison's men could react, placing 2 quick shots that sent them scrambling for cover. Marshal Cody and his deputies opened fire from concealed positions, turning the small canyon into a maelstrom of gunfire and ricocheting bullets. Morrison proved no gunfighter, freezing in panic as violence exploded around him. Joe Crowfeather materialized behind him like a ghost, placing rifle barrel against his neck with casual professional efficiency. I wouldn't, Joe advised quietly as Morrison reached for his weapon. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes. Morrison's hired guns, faced with superior numbers and positioning, threw down weapons and raised hands. Morrison himself seemed to age 10 years as reality became clear. Jake found Esperanza just inside the mine shaft, small knife in hand, dark eyes blazing with fierce joy of survival. Are you hurt? He asked, holstering his gun. No, she said simply, but I am very angry. Good, Jake replied. Anger's useful. Means you're still fighting. Marshal Cody appeared in the mine entrance, badge glinting. Miss Flores, are you injured? Do you require medical attention? I require justice, Esperanza replied with quiet intensity. These men took me from my family, threatened to kill me if I didn't renounce my beliefs, and promised worse would happen to my sister if I didn't cooperate. All of which will be detailed in my report, the marshal assured her. Morrison and his associates will face federal charges. This kind of criminal conspiracy crosses territorial lines, making it federal court matter. As they rode back toward Cedar Ridge, Jake found himself beside Esperanza, both lost in thought. The immediate crisis was over, but larger questions remained. "What happens now?" Jake asked, as familiar landmarks came into view. "Now we rebuild," Esperanza replied. "Morrison's network is broken, but the problems that created it still exist. Workers still need fair wages, safe conditions, dignity in their labor. And us," the question slipped out before Jake could stop it. Esperanza turned to look at him, dark eyes searching his face carefully. "What do you want to happen with us?" Jake thought about Sarah, about 3 years of empty existence since her death, about how Esperanza had awakened feelings he'd thought buried forever. "I want to find out," he said simply. Her smile was like sunrise over desert. "Then we will find out together." They crested the final hill before Jake's ranch and stopped in astonishment. The entire property was covered with flowers, thousands of them, creating a color carpet extending from house to barn to furthest fence line. Desert marigolds, Indian paintbrush, prickly pear blossoms, and dozens of other varieties had been carefully arranged in patterns that turned the ranch into living artwork. People emerged from behind buildings, rose from where they'd been kneeling among flowers. Mexican families, Anglo neighbors, even some business owners from town who'd previously remained neutral. Maria and Elena Flores hurried forward, faces glowing with joy and relief. "Mija!" Maria cried, embracing her daughter with fierce maternal possessiveness. Dr. Hayes appeared from behind the barn, medical bag in one hand, wildflower bouquet in the other. "Welcome home," he said simply. Thomas Flores stepped forward, weathered face creased with emotion. "Senor Thompson, retry J, continue edit."